Hello everyone, today we come to the next 13 horror stories. Let's start. Story 1, Yog Hlub. I was 20 at the time, and one summer my parents sent me off to California to visit my grandparents and help them around the house and so on. It was just a regular visit. I stayed with my grandparents, helped them out, saw a lot of other family, stuff like that. About 2 weeks later, more or less after coming home, I got sat on. I woke up and couldn't get up or move. I could only hear the jingles of the coins and beads made from the Hmong clothing. Then, after a few moments, as it got closer, I could feel the coins and beads pressed up against me. After it sat on me, the situation got weirder. She started crying. I apologize, I cannot write in Hmong, but she said, in Hmong, Sky, I finally found you. I missed you so much. Don't you remember me? It's Houa, while crying on me. My reaction was, what on earth? My name isn't Sky. It's Yahtzee, I don't want to give out my real name. After a few minutes of being sat on, I finally was able to get up. I felt my shirt, and it was all wet, it wasn't spit or anything, and that frightened me. I got free by spitting. My aunt told me if I ever got sat on, I should spit so the spirit would run away. I personally don't know why, but it worked, and a lot of people I know say the same thing too. The next day, I told my parents, but they didn't believe me and told me to brush it off. Later that day, I hung out with my friends and told them what happened. One of my friends was a shaman and he knows a lot, but he did not have a mentor to teach him how to do the ritual properly. He told me it was a past girlfriend from my previous life or something that followed me when I went to visit my grandparents in California. That much I figured out myself. Later, throughout the months, I just kept getting sat on no matter where I slept. I would always wake up in the middle of the night/early morning and wake up to her crying or talking to me. Once or twice, I would have enough strength to open my eyes just a little bit, and I saw her. Maybe it was dark and I was sleepy, but she was attractive. Then after that, I would break free and go back to sleep, but before I could break free, she would always tell me stories about her and Sky. But in her perspective, when she said Sky, she really meant me. One story she mentioned scared me the most. She told me in Hmong, don't you remember the promise we made to each other? That we would always be together, even in our next lives. I kept telling my parents what happened and told them to call a shaman and do Hmong plig. That morning, after she told me about the promise, I told my parents everything about it, and they told me to brush it off again, but things escalated, and we started arguing. After the argument, I finally convinced my parents to call a shaman. The following weekend, the shaman came, and we did Hmong plig. It didn't work. The shaman told my parents and I that the bond between her and me was too strong and that she would not leave. To not be concerned with anything, because all she wanted was just to stay with me. A month passed after the Hmong plig, it was around November. I kept getting sat on, but it did not bother me so much. It just got annoying, and I had a lack of sleep. Sometime in the middle of November, my grandma from California called. She wanted to Hmong plig for me in California, because she thought the shamans that lived near us were no good. She also wanted us to visit for the Fresno New Year. My parents agreed, and we went to California. My grandma did Hmong plig for my family and me, but again, the shaman said he could not help me because of how strong the spirit was. I just accepted the fact that this spirit would follow me for the rest of my life, and that I would just have to live with it. A week after the Hmong plig, we went to the Fresno New Year and stayed with my grandparents for a month. So we went to the New Year celebrations and did all the New Year activities, walked around, bought food, and checked out the tents they had set up. As my cousin and I walked around, I caught something out of the corner of my eye and turned to look at it again. It was her, and she was staring at me. But she was in modern clothing and with a few of her friends. She wore a pair of Uggs, skinny jeans, and a black North Face jacket. I asked my cousin if he saw her, a girl in Uggs, skinny jeans, and a black North Face jacket. He answered, "Yeah, she's pretty cute." I told him okay, and that he could sit this one out because I didn't want a wingman for this. I walked up to her and her friends, scared and anxious. I didn't know what to expect. I said Houa. She looked at her friends with disbelief and did not answer me. She said Sky. I told her no, that my name was Yahtzee, and asked her for her real name. She said, C. We chit-chatted alone while her girlfriends watched from afar to make sure she was safe, and my cousin did the same. It turned out she had the same problem since she was 17, she was 19 when I met her, but her experiences were less dramatic than mine. In her case, C would just wake up paralyzed. There would be a man sitting at the edge of her bed, telling her stories about him and Houa, trying to get C to remember. After talking about our experiences, C and I hit it off pretty well. We kept in contact and became an official couple a few months later. Ever since then, since C and I met, we do not get sat on anymore. I am now 25, and C is 24. We have been happily married for 2 years, and we are expecting a newborn daughter. C keeps joking around, saying we should call our daughter Houa, trying to scare me. Now, do not get me wrong, I am thankful for how C and I met, but now I just want to put that behind me and focus on my family. Story 2, The Ghost of Mae Sai. There's a small village near Mae Sai, Thailand, where the mountains are shrouded in mist and the bamboo houses creak at night with the sound of the jungle. In that village lived a Hmong man named Chu, who was known for his kindness and charm. But like many stories in quiet villages, there was one secret that haunted him. Years ago, when Chu was young, he fell in love with a woman named Mai. She was beautiful, with long black hair and eyes that sparkled like the stars above the Mekong River. Their love was intense, but like the fog that rolled through the hills, it was fleeting. Chu's parents disapproved of Mai. They didn't think she came from a good enough family and pressured Chu to leave her and marry someone they deemed more suitable. Eventually, Chu gave in. He broke things off with Mai and married a woman named Mi, who was from a wealthy family in the nearby city. Mai, devastated by Chu's betrayal, disappeared into the jungle one rainy night. No one heard from her again, and rumors spread that she had taken her own life by the river where she and Chu used to meet. Years passed. Chu's life seemed perfect on the surface. He had a beautiful wife, a new house, and a job as a merchant, selling Hmong textiles in the village market. But late at night, when the rest of the village was silent, Chu would hear something. It started with the sound of a woman sobbing outside his house. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind or the animals in the jungle. But the sobbing became louder. And closer. One night, as Chu lay in bed, he heard a soft knock on the window next to him. Thinking it was his wife Mi returning from the market, he called out, "Mi? Is that you?" The knock came again, this time more insistent. Chu got out of bed, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. Standing outside in the moonlight was a woman. Her hair was long and soaked from the rain, her clothes ragged, and her face pale as the mist. It was Mai. Chu's heart nearly stopped. He backed away, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Mai," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She shouldn't be there. She couldn't be there." Mai's voice was soft, but there was an edge of bitterness to it. "Why did you leave me, Chu? You promised we'd be together forever." He stumbled backward, feeling the cold sweat run down his back. I had no choice, Mai. My parents." "You lied," she interrupted, her eyes darkening. "You left me for her. Now, I'm alone." Chu shut the window and bolted it, but he could still hear her voice, like it was coming from inside his head. "I waited for you by the river, Chu. You never came back. So I stayed there, waiting, in the water. And now I'm here for you. Every night after that, she returned. Her knocks became louder. Sometimes she would scratch at the walls, dragging her nails down the wood until splinters broke off. Other nights, Chu would hear her voice calling his name from the jungle behind his house. Chu. Come with me. It wasn't long before his wife, Mi, began to notice Chu's behavior. He was restless, his eyes hollow from lack of sleep, and he refused to speak about what was haunting him. Mi begged him to go to the village shaman for help, but Chu resisted, fearing what the shaman might uncover. One night, the haunting escalated. Chu woke up to the feeling of cold fingers wrapping around his ankle, pulling him toward the edge of the bed. He kicked and screamed, but when he opened his eyes, there was no one there. That was when he decided he couldn't ignore Mai anymore. He had to go to the river. In the dead of night, with only the light of the moon to guide him, Chu made his way to the riverbank where he and Mai used to meet. The fog was thick, and the sound of rushing water filled his ears. As he approached the spot where Mai was last seen, the air grew colder, and he could feel a presence around him. Suddenly, from the mist, she appeared. Mai, standing waist deep in the water, her eyes glowing with a pale, unnatural light. Her voice was a whisper, but it echoed all around him. Chu, come to me. He stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and guilt. He wanted to run, but his feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. Mai, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I left you. She smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile he remembered. It was twisted with pain and anger. It's too late for apologies, Chu. You belong with me now. The water began to swirl around her, rising up and reaching toward him. Chu stumbled back, but the ground beneath him was soft and muddy, pulling him down as if the earth itself wanted to claim him. Please. He cried out. I didn't mean for this to happen. Mai's figure moved closer, her arms outstretched. Come with me, Chu. We can be together, like you promised. Just as her cold hands brushed his skin, Chu heard a voice behind him, an old man's chant, familiar and strong. It was the village shaman. He had followed Chu, knowing the young man would try to confront the spirit alone. The shaman threw a handful of sacred herbs into the air and began chanting louder. Mai shrieked, her form flickering in and out of sight. The water surged, but the shaman's chants held her back. With one final scream, she disappeared into the mist, the river falling silent once more. Chu collapsed on the riverbank, shaking with fear and exhaustion. The shaman helped him to his feet and spoke softly, her spirit is restless, Chu. She feels betrayed and will not find peace until you make amends. What can I do? Chu asked, his voice breaking. You must give her the closure she seeks. Build her a shrine by the river, offer her your prayers, and ask for her forgiveness. Only then will she leave you. Chu did as the shaman instructed. He built a small shrine where he and Mai used to meet, leaving offerings of food, flowers, and incense. For weeks, he visited the shrine, asking for Mai's forgiveness. Eventually, the visits from Mai stopped. The nights grew quiet again, and the sounds of sobbing no longer echoed through the jungle. But Chu would never forget. He lived the rest of his life with the weight of his choices, knowing that some promises, once broken, could haunt you forever. Story 3. This story takes place in 1998 in Fresno, California. I was there to witness something deeply unsettling, a case of demonic possession. To protect the identities of those involved, I'll refer to them as John, Tua, and Grandma. On a hot summer day, John, Tua, and their friends decided to have a barbecue at Lost Lake. Everyone showed up, ready to enjoy the day. They spent time fishing, swimming, and sharing special moments with their loved ones. John was in charge of the barbecue, while Tua was swimming nearby in the small lake. Before leaving to head back to town for more drinks, John asked Tua to watch the meat on the grill. Tua got out of the water and grabbed his towel. As he did, he noticed a little girl standing in front of the barbecue grill. He assumed one of their friends had brought along a younger sister. Tua headed to the bathroom, but when he came back, the little girl had vanished. As he went to check on the meat, he noticed bite marks on all of the chicken. Angry, Tua assumed one of his friends had been taking bites and putting the pieces back on the grill. Later on, everyone ate and enjoyed their meal before heading home. While driving back, Tua brought up the little girl, asking John who had brought her along. John, confused, replied that he didn't see anyone bring a little girl, only their girlfriends had been there. When they got home, John dropped off Tua at his house and went back to his own place. That night, Tua had a strange dream. He saw a creature lurking at Lost Lake and watched as the little girl he had seen earlier transformed into a ghost with long, white hair. The next morning, Tua woke up and went to the kitchen. His grandma noticed a bite mark on his back shoulder and asked him about it. Tua, confused, said he had no idea how it got there. Concerned, Grandma applied some medicine to the bite, but the moment she touched him, she felt a sharp pain in her own back. Alarmed, the grandma stopped and told Tua to help her to the sofa and call the parents. Later on, the family gathered to discuss the bite mark. Tua explained what he had seen the previous day at Lost Lake. His dad, realizing the seriousness of the situation, suspected that the creature had followed his son home. He prayed to God for protection, but soon they understood that the creature had possessed the grandma. That night, things took a terrifying turn. Grandma began speaking in strange languages, chanting in bizarre forms. She screamed, cried, jumped around wildly, and even bit and scratched at the family members. In desperation, they tied her up and called for a priest. When the priest arrived to perform an exorcism, the struggle intensified. Grandma, in her possessed state, became violent. At one point, she kicked the priest so hard that he fell to the ground, coughing from the impact. I was there, witnessing the possession, and I noticed something chilling. Grandma's skin began to change color, and her eyes shifted unnaturally. My parents told me to go home, but I refused. I was mesmerized, unable to look away as the possession unfolded. At one point, the grandma told everyone that her stomach felt strange and asked them to lift up her shirt. When they did, we saw something horrifying, a handprint, as if pressed from the inside of her stomach. It sent chills through everyone present. Desperate for help, the family decided to call their neighbor, a shaman. She arrived, performed the ritual, and after a moment, instructed the family to take Grandma outside. The shaman explained that she needed to continue the ritual outside of the house to confront the spirit properly. The shaman held a gong in one hand, with a stack of burning incense sticks and a pan of hot oil in the other. She used the incense sticks to flick hot oil, causing flames and sparks to erupt around Grandma. A few times, Grandma's clothes even caught fire, but the family quickly put it out with water. The ritual continued for an hour, with tension building in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Grandma woke up, free from the demonic possession. The shaman, exhausted but calm, gave one final instruction. Before Grandma could re-enter her home, she needed to pass under a rope of lemongrass with wooden knives hanging from it. This would ensure that no lingering spirits followed her back inside. Grandma lived well since, but in 2004, she passed away due to old age. Story 4, They're Talking to Me. About 6 to 9 months after my grandpa passed away, my youngest brother, Aaron, had been seeing and hearing things around the house. This occurred one day when my siblings and I returned home from school. He told my parents about his dreams and encounters, but they didn't want to worry us, so they always said, "Na jamon tau, pa suaven tau." Eat a lot, dream a lot. We hated when they said things like that. While it was obviously meant to keep us from being scared, there were times we wished they would just tell us the truth instead of hiding it. Then they will say, "Oh, by the way, you need ritual tomorrow, so wake up early." My brother John and I, the two older siblings, walked home from middle school to join our younger brother Aaron and our little sister Mary, who had just returned from elementary school. We gathered at the dinner table, with John playing games on the PS2 behind us. I sat across from my little sister Mary, while my brother Aaron sat to my right. We quietly enjoyed our meal, sharing snippets about our day. Suddenly, Aaron let out a sigh, and looked at me. "They're talking to me again," he said. This had happened before, and I was growing increasingly frustrated with these things scaring my siblings. Taking a bite of my food, I turned to Aaron and said, "Ask them what they want." Before I could finish my sentence, my sister Mary let out a wail. "What's wrong, Mary?" John asked, hopping off his game and rushed to the dinner table. "What's wrong?" She started to cry. "They're talking to me too." My heart sunk. I immediately began to freak out. I had a crying sister and a little brother who was starting to hyperventilate. "Shoo!" I ran over and grabbed her to hush her to stop her from crying, but she couldn't stop. I immediately thought about the old ghost stories my parents, grandparents, and family members used to talk about. They used to say that ghosts and demons were afraid of peach blossoms. "John!" I yelled. "Grab them, I'm going to go grab a knife and cut the peach branches." John grabbed both of them and we all rushed into the backyard. My sister was still wailing, and I tried my best to cut the branches off. "Where are we going to go?" John asked. Where was safe? I wasn't sure. Maybe our parents' room? "Let's go to Mom and Dad's room," I exclaimed. We sprinted back into the house, rushing past the living room, dining room, and kitchen, straight into our parents' room. "They're coming!" Aaron yelled. I shut the door to my parents' room, my heart racing. Everyone was scared, and I knew I had to be strong for them. John grabbed my dad's handgun and yelled, "I don't know who's coming, but I'll shoot at them." We all knew it wasn't a feasible solution, but he was trying to play the big brother role and keep us safe. Mary continued to cry, while Aaron appeared frantic, almost as if he were detached from his own body. "What are we going to do now?" John asked. I turned to Aaron. "What's the safest room in this house?" I asked. I thought of my grandpa, and the room in which he last stayed in before he passed away. "Is Grandpa's room safe?" Aaron nodded. "Grandpa's room is safe." I looked at John. "We have to go to Grandpa's room." John nodded, and we positioned the two younger siblings between us for protection. The four of us ran down the hallway, which felt like an eternity as we made our way to my grandpa's room. I slashed at anything in our path as we hurried along. Finally, we reached his room, and I shut the door, locking it behind us. "Aaron," I grabbed him. "What do they want?" "I don't know," he replied. "I don't know." I looked at John. "We have to call Dad." "Where's the phone?" At that time, none of the kids in the family owned a cell phone. "It's in the kitchen." I rolled my eyes in frustration. "Really?" "It was back there." I told them to stay put and ran back to the kitchen as fast as I could. I quickly grabbed what I needed and raced back down our long, L-shaped hallway. "Open the door!" I exclaimed. John opened the door and locked it behind me. "I have to call Dad," I yelled out. I called him and explained the situation. "Dad, you have to come home right now." I hung up the phone and looked at him, then I looked at Mary. Aaron's eyes suddenly locked onto the door. "They're trying to get in." My heart dropped once again. I had thought the first time would be the worst of it, but this time it sank even deeper. I can hear the door banging. Aaron yelled. It felt as if I were more afraid than they were, especially since I couldn't hear what they were hearing or see what they were seeing. Call for Grandpa to help us. Tell Pog Koob, great-grandma, and Yog Hlub, great-grandpa, to help us. Tell them we need help. I looked over at Mary. Mary. Do the same. Ask for help. Close your eyes and ask for help. I'll shoot them, Aaron. If they come in, I'll shoot them. John was losing it. I think he was feeling the same hopelessness and helplessness that I was. We wanted to protect our younger siblings, but we didn't know how. Shooting at the door was useless, yet he was willing to do it. They're coming. Aaron opened his eyes. He seemed a little calmer. They said they'll help us. I became confused and overwhelmed with emotions. Who? Who's going to help us? Grandpa and Grandma, and the others. At that time, I didn't really bother to ask who the others were, but I should have guessed who they were. It didn't really occur to me until a few years later. Yeah, they're going to help us, Mary agreed. They said not be scared. I looked at the two. Just keep asking. Tell them to hurry. Tell them we're scared. They both nodded. John heard a car park in the front, and lo and behold, it was our dad. I pulled up the window blinds and screamed into the street. Dad, hurry. My dad came rushing down the hallway and started to bang on the door. No. Dad can't come in, Aaron whispered. What? I replied. It's Dad. No, they said if it's really Dad then we have to cut him, and if he really bleeds, then it's Dad. This time, I wasn't listening to him. My grandpa and our ancestors would never let us harm our dad. That was just crazy. I brushed off what Aaron said, convinced it was just the bad spirits trying to get to him. When John opened the door for our dad, he looked at the four of us, and we must have looked like we'd just gone through hell and back. He took the peach blossoms from me and began sweeping the house to clear out all the evil. Later that night, my mom came home, and we all went to my Yog Hlub's house, my mom's dad, to explain the situation. Naturally, he told us the same thing, not to worry. Ironically, they held a unique ceremony that weekend for us. A few years later, we discovered that Aaron was going to be a shaman, and he is now. The others he was referring to were unknowingly his Neegs, guides, sent to protect him. Story 5, continuation of my mom's sister. As morning came, they came back to the old campsite to check if any of the traps were set off, and to their surprise, only one of the traps were set off. There they saw that the trap was set off by my mom's sister. She was stuck in the trap and smelt like rotten pork covered in dirt and dry blood. She was begging for help and telling them to take her home. They asked her why she was there, and she said she didn't know. All she knew was that she went to the river to fetch water, and then she got trapped there. Being frightened by her, the elder told her that they would only help her and take her back to the village if she was willing for them to tie her up. She agreed, and they took my mom's older sister back to village. My grandparents were relieved that they found her and thanked them. A few days later, my mom was playing with her older sister again, and my mom asked her where she went. She told my mom, I saw you coming after me, but I didn't want you to follow me, so I ran and hid in the bushes. Then you ran right past me. Then something grabbed me, and when I came to I was trapped. At this point, my mom's older sister was clawing into my mom's arm and snarling like a dog about to bite at my mom. My mom started crying, and my grandfather came and told my mom's older sister to let go. She let go and started having a seizure, and her eyes rolled back and was all white. Although it had already been weeks since my mom's older sister was found, she still smelt like rotten pork. No matter how much my grandmother bathed her and washed her clothes, she smelt so horrible. One day my grandfather was approached by the village leader, and he told my grandfather to take my mom's older sister to the farm, and let her stay there because she was too stinky, and it was stinking up the whole town. Not being able to do anything, my grandfather took my mom's older sister to the farm. He was afraid she'd run away again, so he told her daughter, "I'm sorry for doing this, but I must do it for your safety. I'm sorry I have to lock you up by your foot, but I promise you, your mom and I will come every day to visit you and bring you food." My mom's older sister replied, "It's okay, Dad. I understand. I'm sorry for being this way." As promised, my grandparents and my mom, they always went to the farm every day to stay with my mom's older sister and bring her food. A few months passed by, and the communists were getting closer and closer to town. The day that my grandparents were planning to leave town and run into the forests, they went to get my mom's older sister too, but when they got there, she was gone. Everything was there, the lock, the chain, the food, her clothes, everything. But she was nowhere in sight. They stayed until noontime and called for her around their farm, but she was nowhere in sight. That night, my grandparents heard gunshots closer and closer to town, so my grandparents and my mom them ran into the forest with some of the villagers and left. While they were in the forest, they came across a body of a young girl. She was dead and rotting already. Some villagers who knew my grandparents told them to go look, and it was my mom's older sister. At the time, they were already in the forest for about almost a month or so, and it was impossible for a 10-year-old girl to have traveled so far into the jungle at a short amount of time and die there already decaying. They couldn't give my mom's older sister a proper funeral, so they just dug her a grave and told her to stay there and protect them from the communists. They told her that she did it to herself and not to be sorry, and blessed her to a better life in reincarnation. After that, they buried her. A few months later, they crossed the Mekong River, and unfortunately, my grandfather drowned and never made it to Thailand. My mom's older sister's grave is still existent but has never been found since it's been several decades already. Story 6, My Mom's Sister. My mom and her sister were adopted by my grandparents. This was during the war and my mother was still rather young, but my mom's older sister was roughly 9/10. Not exactly sure because my mom only knows birth dates by saying what kind of crops they were planting. My mom told us that her sister was kind of weird, and my grandparents never allowed them to play together alone. My mom always wondered why they would never let my mom play with her older sister alone, so one day my mom had an idea to follow her older sister into the woods to fetch some water. As she was following her older sister would walk for a bit then run, because she knew my mom was following her. As my mom's older sister neared the river, she started running really fast, and my mom wasn't able to catch up with her, so my mom sat by the roadside and waited for her to come back from fetching water, so they could go home together since it was getting rather dark. As my mom was sitting down, she recalled playing with footprints that were not human-like. She thought to herself, why are there so many footprints when only my sister and I came to get water? My mom continued to stay there and waited for her sister. She waited and waited and waited, and her sister never came back. The villagers were coming back from their farms and spotted my mom. They asked, "Daughter, what are you doing here? Aren't you afraid of the communists coming to get you?" My mom replied, "I'm waiting for my older sister to get back from fetching water. I followed her here, and she started running but disappeared, so I'm waiting for her to come back, and we can go home together." The villagers replied, "We just came back from the river, and there is no one there. Come with us. We'll take you home." As my mom came back with the villagers, she realized that the villagers kept on saying, "Hurry up. There are tiger footprints ahead. Let's take this road instead." They were taking forever to get to the village. Then they finally hit the village around night time and met my grandparents at the edge of town already looking for my mom and her older sister. They took my mom home, and then my grandfather called the uncles and said they were gonna have to go searching for my mom's older sister. As they were heading out, my mom was put into bed and sleeping at one of my grandfather's uncle's place. She watched through the wall Siovine keys and saw that my grandfather and the men were carrying torches and heading to the river. My grandfather them didn't return until the next morning, and when they returned, my grandfather and grandmother were met by villagers that lived at the edge of the town. They were demanding money from my grandparents to pay for their dead livestock. It was then that my mom learned that her sister was rumored as a flesh-eating demon. My grandparents refused to pay because the villagers did not see her come eat their livestock. Also yesterday, there were tiger footprints, not human, so it wasn't their oldest daughter who ate their livestock. A few days went by, and some men from the village went hunting. They split up into 2 groups and camped not too far from each other. As night time came, they were laying down about to sleep, but one of the men just couldn't sleep. He said that something was bothering him, so he stayed up and kept wandering into the trees. He noticed that there was a person up in the tree. He couldn't see his or her face, but he saw the red lab siv around the person's waist. He then woke up his buddies. They were looking up at the treetops and saw what he saw. Then the buddies said, "Let's go to the other campground and get the other guys first because we're not sure if it's human or not." Then one of the buddies fired 2 shots into the air, as a signal, and they headed out to the other campground where the other group was. They mentioned to the elders what they saw, and so the elder told them to take him to their campsite. As they got there, the elder told them to chop down the tree, and a few hours later the tree was down. They all looked at the tree and noticed that the treetop had a clean cut, not a knife-looking cut like the bottom of the tree where they were cutting. The elder said, since whoever it is that strong, then they would go back to the other camp and wait until daylight, then head home, but they would set traps just in case there would be animals that passes by in the morning. Title: What's Wrong with My Baby Girl? Story 7, What's Wrong with My Baby Girl? 5 years ago, I gave birth to a perfectly healthy and lovely little girl. She wasn't the type of baby that was up a lot, she was the sleepy type. She also had an older sister who adored her dearly. 2 weeks after my daughter was born, she started to become really fussy, which can be normal in some cases. I assumed she might have colic and tried changing her formula, but that didn't help. So, I took her to the pediatrician to find out what was wrong. Eventually, there was nothing wrong with her. Her pediatrician just advised me to make sure she was kept warm enough. I thought to myself, we Hmong folks usually keep our babies extra warm and tightly wrapped. So, I decided to do the opposite. Maybe she didn't like being wrapped so tightly. Later that day, she seemed less fussy after I loosened her receiving blanket. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, please don't tell me this little girl is going to be like me where she doesn't want any blankets on her or anyone holding her. But guess what? That wasn't the issue. Starting that night and continuing for a week, she cried throughout the entire night, on and off. As soon as everyone fell asleep, she'd start whining, and it would turn into an all-nighter. It wasn't her formula, it wasn't the way she was wrapped, and she didn't need to be burped. She didn't want to be rocked or walked around either. The few times she drifted back to sleep in my arms, it only lasted until I laid her back down in her little bed. I went days without sleep, and the frustration was really setting in. Her dad was no help either. Thankfully, I'm no longer with him. Finally, after another week of sleepless nights, my little girl started whining and crying again in the middle of the night. I got up, took her out of her crib, walked her around, fed her, talked to her, hummed to her everything I could think of. This went on for hours, and she still wasn't going to sleep. By then, I was completely exhausted. I sat down on my bed, holding her in my right arm. From where I was sitting, I could see the bedroom door to my right, which was open. Both the bedroom and hallway lights were on. As I looked down at her, I thought to myself, this is strange. Something doesn't seem right. Why is this little girl always awake at this time, whining or crying? As I sat there holding her, I started feeling really sleepy, nodding in and out. So I decided to rest my eyes for just a few seconds. When I opened them, she was asleep. I didn't want to put her back in her bed, knowing she'd wake up immediately. So, I kept holding her and tried to rest my eyes from time to time. Before I nodded off again, I was sitting there on my bed looking at my daughter's face. The way how my head is turned to her, I can see the hallway. Just as I was about to nod off, I saw a little Poj and Sug skipping from the living room into the hallway and then into my bedroom. Right at that moment, my body was basically numbed. I was so astonished that I forgot to breathe. My heart even felt like it was going to jump right out of my chest. This Poj and Sug was actually how my mom described it in her ghost stories. Very small, like 3 toilet tissues high only. Hairy, but not too hairy to where you can't see its skin. Just as hairy as a hairy guy's arm. The head is not round like humans, it is more like a cone-shaped and eyes were really slanted. This little Poj and Sug was very little, but skipped very quickly. It skipped and skipped till it reached to me and my daughter. By then, I was too astonished to even move. Right when it got to us, it tipped toe and looked over and down to my daughter. Almost like adoring my daughter, and then it looked up to me and gave me the most creepiest smile ever. It vanished into thin air, and the moment it did, I caught my breath. I looked around, then at my daughter, and instead of fear, I felt anger. I realized it was the Poj and Sug that had been messing with my little baby at night, keeping her awake all that time. I stood up quickly, spat, and cursed at it. I said, Nyag ensej muag tuag, koj thav tuag los kas es koj feed you of los thab kuv tus me nuam ua luaj li. Koj tsist saj muag los nyag ensej muag tuag. You dead face, do you want to die? Why do you keep coming to disturb my child? Aren't you ashamed, you dead face? Right after that, I tried to wake my husband. He would not get up at all. All he said was, I'm tired. Ever since that night, my baby didn't have any sleepless nights anymore. As my girls grew older and I became a single mother, more supernatural events began to happen to us. My little ones were unaware of it, but I knew what was going on around us. As a single mother, I became very protective of my girls. So, whenever something supernatural occurred, I felt not fear but anger. I would respond exactly as I did that night with my newborn. Story 8, The Treasure Chest. My dad once told me a story when I was still a little girl. It's a Hmong legend and ghost story. One day this man too, substitute name, was hunting in the forest. He was alone, but he wasn't scared. He grew tired and decided to sit down and relax for a while. He then found a cliff with a beautiful waterfall. He sat down next to the creek and then from a distance, he saw something shiny. He got up immediately and ran to see what it was. When he got to it, it was a beautiful treasure chest full of gold and jewels. He was astonished, he tried grabbing the gold, but it seemed like there was a force field around it. Two stepped back in confusion, and suddenly heard a woman's laugh. She had a deep and evil laugh. He got scared, but with his greed, he didn't let the gold go. He ran back to the village and told his wife and children. His wife wanted the gold too, so they consulted a shaman. Two brought the shaman to the site along with a few villagers and his wife. The shaman did his ritual and it took about 2 hours. When the shaman was done, he said if two wanted the gold, he had to sacrifice one of his daughters to the Poj and Suj that guarded the treasure. Tu and his wife were so desperate that they even discussed it. They had 3 daughters and 2 sons. They made the decision to sacrifice their youngest daughter, who was 13 years old at the time. She didn't agree to it. She cried and begged, but Tu wanted the gold badly. They tied her up, cut her throat open and put the blood around the treasure chest. The gold slowly faded into ash and the Poj and Suj's laugh returned. "Tu, you are so mean and dumb." The villagers got scared and ran back. "Where's the gold?" But the Poj and Suj got away with the gold and Tu's daughter. From that day on, Tu will always hear his younger daughter's cries at night. One by one, each of his children passed away, and after they were all gone, his wife followed. He was left on his own. He lost his sanity, often laughing randomly and rolling his eyes back. One day, he was calling out for his younger daughter to come home and eat, as if she were still there. A few weeks later, he went missing. They say that now he guards the treasure. Story 9, Camping during Memorial Weekend. We went camping for 4 days and 3 nights. The first 2 nights, nothing happened. We got there Friday. Sunday morning, we packed all our stuff into our cars and was getting ready to leave. Our friend's nephew didn't want to go home, because he was still having fun. A few of us said no since we've already packed and had little food left, but the uncle was arguing that his nephew wants to stay, so we should stay. We stayed to make his autistic nephew happy. I had a bad feeling all day that I couldn't brush off, but acted like everything was good. That last night, around 2-3 a.m., my partner and I heard someone walking in our camp. From one end to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I wondered, dang, which one of our friends is up late and pacing around like this? After the 3 time, I looked out when the footsteps walked past our tent, but saw nothing. After that, whatever was walking our campsite disappeared. My partner didn't want to scare me, so he said it was just the boat banging on shore. Even though he heard the footsteps too. After he said that, I finally heard the boat banging on the shore. To keep my sanity, I said, "Yes. You're right." Nobody talked about anything until we got home. I told my friend what I heard last night and asked if it was one of them. She answered, no. She thought it was us, but she heard differently from what we heard. She heard someone walking around her tent, and then lifting the lids off the pots like they were looking for food. She also said it went on for a while, but didn't think anything about it either, because she thought it was one of us. I told her, see. I knew it. I had a bad feeling all Sunday, but I brushed it off. Next time, never stay after you've packed or something will happen. She replied, you're right. I didn't feel right all day too, but like you, I didn't want to say anything. Story 10, Getting Over Lisa. Note, the names of the people involved have been changed to protect their identity. My friend Isaac used to work at a Little Caesars near a funeral home. Isaac was a small, timid guy, and his manager was a dick who liked to make Isaac work closings with just a few older Mexican people since all the other Hmong people would say they had school. Isaac didn't like the idea but could take his time and get more hours. Isaac had a girlfriend called Lisa that he was with for 2 years. Lisa and Isaac used to spend late nights together cruising in his car. She eventually left him so she could go to college while Isaac went straight into the workforce. Isaac couldn't get over her for a long time, and that also kept him late at work. One night Isaac was emptying the drawers and wiping down the counters when he heard thunder. It was summer, so he didn't expect there to be rain. Isaac ran outside to roll up his windows as the older employees started clocking out and going home. When he went back inside, he was all alone in the store. He had just finished putting the money in the safe when he heard a loud clap. It wasn't thunder, it sounded like someone was clapping from the very back, near the bathroom. He closed the safe and slowly made his way to the back of the store. As he passed by the boxes near the back, he grabbed the box cutter knife and readied himself for whatever was there. What he saw shocked him. He saw one of the 27-pound bags of flour had fallen onto the floor and was split open, and in the flour, he saw that someone had spelled out a name. The name was written all slanted like in cursive. The name spelled Lisa. He dropped knife on the ground and ran to the front of the store. He already entered the inventory, so he left a note saying that he found one bag of flour on the floor. After turning off the lights and locking the door, he sped home. Isaac's house was about 5 miles away from where he worked, and he would have to travel through one lonely stretch of farmland. That stretch of farmland was completely dark and only had cows out in the pasture. The whole time he was in the car, he felt like something was in there with him. Isaac drove a '97 Civic EX coupe that was lowered with a loud muffler, so his car had trouble going over the bumpy road. He kept looking at his rear view mirror because he thought he saw something move in his back seat. Whenever lightning flashed, he didn't see anything. This only made his paranoia worse. Isaac got home and had a terrible night. In his dreams, he kept seeing a woman dressed in black outside of his house. He saw the woman, and as she turns toward him, and he would hear a sound like a vacuum cleaner. He then would get sat on. This happened for several nights, and each time, he would be able to see the woman's face a little clearer each time. It eventually got so bad that Isaac would drink so he couldn't remember the dreams. Isaac eventually told his parents, who then performed a shaman ritual. The shaman traveled into the spirit world and found out what was bothering him. It turns out this woman's spirit had been waiting for her lover at the funeral home, and it latched on to Isaac when it sensed him all sad and lonely after Lisa left. The woman heard him tell another employee that he missed Lisa, and she became jealous. She knocked down one of the flour bags and wrote Lisa's name because she was feeding off Isaac's fear and misery. The shaman tied a red string on Isaac and told him to never talk of Lisa again. Isaac has taken heed to the shaman's word and hasn't spoken of Lisa to anyone ever since. Story 11. I used to drive along Highway 99 between Fresno and Chico for work. Sometimes I would have to drive to San Francisco in between the cities and would have to take Highway 132 through Modesto. This highway only has 2 lanes going each way. This is my story and I remember it well. It was summer and the days were long and it was pretty hot. My work van didn't have the best AC, so in the summer I'd drive at night with the windows down. My job required me to drive late sometimes, picking up medical supplies from various hospitals up and down California. The beauty of this job was that I can schedule my own pickups sometimes. Due to the heat, I always choose to drive later at night on long trips and return in the morning. This particular trip had me starting in Fresno, stopping at UCSF in San Francisco and then dropping supplies off in Chico before returning home. So I left at 7 p.m. that night. There was nothing special, no omen, nothing about that night that would make it memorable. I grabbed Starbucks on the way out of Fresno so I would be well awake for the drive. I also had friends scattered throughout the area, so I stopped in Modesto to grab a bite with a friend before continuing to the Bay Area. As I wasn't watching the time, we ended up hanging out to 11 p.m. before I realized I had to hit the road to San Francisco. Modesto is about 1 hour and 45 minutes away from SF with good traffic, so I thought no sweat. A quick setup of my van that I drove. It was a utility-type work van that didn't have windows in the back, so at night, it's pitch black back there. The windows were the only source of any light coming into the van. Back to the story. I headed west on 132 and there were not a lot of cars driving during this time. Every 10 minutes or so, I would see a car coming from the other direction. There is a section of this highway that runs next to a small river and is heavily wooded by California standards. So as I was approaching this area, which has no lights, I can see a faint silhouette of a person walking on the shoulder of the other side of the road. As I got closer, she looked like she was middle-aged and was walking in the same direction as I was driving. I thought it was kind of weird at first, but nothing more, and as I drove past her, I looked on my rear view window just out of curiosity to see her face. Although I can see her face, I couldn't really see much because she was sort of walking with her face down and her long black hair was covering her eyes. She was wearing jeans and a red t-shirt. I shifted my eyes to the road in front of me and then looked back in the mirror, but she was gone. I thought to myself, maybe trying not to scare myself, that she was probably fishing like many people do around that part of the river and walked down to the river. I drove on. At this point, I was thinking about who she was as I continued driving. Then about 5 minutes later, I look in front and I could see there was someone else on the road, but this time, they were on the shoulder of my side. I wasn't scared yet, but thought to myself, lots of people with broken cars tonight. As I got closer, I could see that it was a woman in a red shirt and jeans, the same woman that I had seen earlier. My heart started pumping hard and I was scared. I stepped on the gas and zoomed past this woman again, but didn't look back. I knew that there was nothing on that highway until I got to the Bay Area, so there was nowhere I could stop if I wanted to. I kept my foot to the gas pedal and would take a glance in the rear view mirror every so often just to reassure there was no one there. I'm sweating by this point and opened the window to get some fresh air in. My eyes were wide open and zeroed on the task of getting out of there as fast as possible. As I was approaching the turn-off point of the highway, I hear a voice that is distinct and clear as it says, "I'm hungry," and I glance in the rear view to momentarily notice a shadow sitting in the dark. I know it's not possible, but this shadow was darker than the space behind my van. It was only for a split second, but I'm sure I saw someone there. I saw a 76 gas station, so I pulled over to open the back of my van. I hopped out and slid open the side door. There was no one there but boxes of medical supplies. I continued to finish my deliveries that weekend but couldn't sleep. Ever since then, I only travel that road if someone is with me. Story 12. One day a father and son went fishing on a boat not too far away from their home. The father was at the very front of the boat while the son was at the very back of the boat. While fishing, the father got really tired and decided to sleep for a while. When he woke up, he realized that his son wasn't there anymore. He dived into the water and looked for his son, but his son was nowhere to be found. He swam up to the shore and ran home hoping that his son was there. Unfortunately, he wasn't. The father got really worried and called the cops. They investigated the lake and nearby surroundings but couldn't find any trace of the missing son. Days and nights passed as everyone continued searching for the missing boy. Finally, one day a cop had a dream about the missing boy. In the dream, the boy walked up to the cop and said, "How can you guys not find my body? I'm only under the boat." After he said that, the cop immediately woke up. Curious about the dream, the cop went to the boat the following morning and took a deep breath. He pulled the boat out of the water, and there was the missing boy stuck under the fan-like thingy that kept the boat moving. Story 13, Karma Can Be Scary. I was listening to the Hmong radio with my parents. You hear some scary stories and good stuff on there, lol. There was a woman who was around 49 years old. She wanted to share her story. She said all her life she went to church and devoted herself to God. She didn't believe in the paranormal until it happened to her and a loved one. Her husband worked for the government or something like that. He would go check PCA's homes to record how the patients are doing in order to confirm work hours for PCAs. PCA is short for personal care assistant. I think it's the same as a certified nursing assistant but different in some ways from what I heard. B was scheduled to check an ill old man who was under care of his son. On the day of his visit, his son had to grab grocery from his car. He asked B to sit down and wait for him. While the son was outside, B wanted to test if the man and his son were liars who wanted easy money. The old man was sitting on the couch. B sat on a chair next to the couch. B purposely dropped his cup of water on the floor. He watched as the old man picked the cup up with shaky, fragile hands. Not as in the nervous type of shaky, but the kind of shakiness that the elderly tend to have. B immediately got angry. He left saying that they're both liars. When the son asked what happened, B replied in Hmong, "You guys lied that your dad can't work because of his health, but he picked up a cup I dropped. I will report this to the government." The old man got really upset and angry. His son took care of him without any money from working as a PCA. The son was forbidden to work as a PCA. His father was indeed unable to work. Not sure if it was because of stroke or other factors. The woman on the radio didn't say. A few months later, the old man died. But he didn't die in peace. A few weeks after he was laid to rest, B started getting really sick. The doctor wasn't sure what was wrong with him. His wife and their family prayed. A few weeks later, after B's illness, he had passed away. After doing B's funeral service, his wife started having dreams about him. It went on like this. "B, I need money. Please burn some money for me." "Wife, but we go to church." "I don't know how to." The wife woke up. She thought nothing of this dream. "I probably just miss him enough to dream," she thought. She had the same dream again one night. "B, wife, burn me some money." "Wife, why? What happened?" "B, I made a huge mistake. I need the money. Please hurry." The wife woke up and decided she needed to do something about this. She began asking around for shamans to help. Shaman people told her that her husband, B, did something really bad to an old man. He accused the old man of lying when the man was actually really ill. The old man suffered with no medical insurance because of what B reported to his supervisors. His son worked hard from trying to take care of him while finding a job to care for his medical needs since they were denied. The old man was not very happy when he died, so he wanted to drag B along with him. Right at the time the wife asked the shaman about this was when there was a court in heaven where B will be judged along with the old man. I didn't believe that courts in heaven existed. I thought it was fake, but this is the third time I've heard from a shaman about things like this. The wife burned money offerings. The money was used as B's apology to the old man. Ever since then she doesn't dream about her husband anymore. She became a believer instead of a skeptic. So people, be good and kind. Be understanding of others. Do not try to ruin other people's lives, hurt or abuse them, because one day karma will happen. The karma you can't imagine is getting your soul dragged with the dead. Who knows what they did to B's soul in court? He probably had to serve as the old man's slave for his entire lifetime or worse. Thank you for always supporting the channel and welcoming its videos. Wishing you good health, and remember to subscribe to the channel.